And then as well, get any input from all of you that might have, different control program that you use and what you might be hearing about. Just because the more brains you put in the room and come up with an idea, the better solution you can get, right? So with that, I'd like to introduce Mark Cooper, which I'm sure you all know, right? Farm Advisor for Napa County since 2009.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to be here today talking about our experience in Napa with organic leafhopper management, which, if you notice the tagline up there, managing invasive species, that's really has been the reason why we started a lot of this leafhopper work, is because when we were just managing Western grape leafhopper, it was no big deal, but now that we have the invasive species, it's become an issue. And so this is, the extent of the issue, in that with these invasive leafhoppers, what we see is that we get so much feeding and so much damage to the leaves that we'll get defoliation. And, as you can see, the crop is still out there, so not having leaves and trying to ripen your crop, and, not compatible. And then that's a photo that Glenn McGordy took when Virginia creeper was first coming into his region. And you can see that even in the conventional vineyard, they weren't having an issue, but in organic vineyard, that was not sprayed. That was also pretty high levels of defoliation there. And, this, even if you don't farm organically or you don't farm everything organically, this is important because, I don't know if you've been keeping up with it, but DPR is starting to limit the use of certain neonicotinoid chemistries. One of those, imidacloprid, and is one that we have historically relied on in conventional vineyards for leafhopper management. So, being better in conventional vineyards about leafhopper management will also be something that you'll need to think about in the future. So, with that, a little bit of biology and background. So, the biological control of vineyard leafhoppers, which of course in organic vineyards is really important. So anagris is the parasitoid species that is the most common leafhopper parasitoid. So don't confuse that with anagyrus, which is your vine mealybug parasitoid, right? This is anagris, 3 different species as far as we know, and they're extremely small wasps. And what you can see the female doing in the top picture there is laying her egg inside the egg of the leafhopper. So as the wasp lays the egg in the leafhopper egg, the leafhopper larvae develop inside the anagris leaf. The anagris larvae develop inside the leafhopper eggs. And then when that next generation is ready, you can see that anagris wasp coming out of those eggs. So this biological control is really what we've relied on, particularly in organic vineyards, when it comes to managing leafhoppers. So nobody's rearing these parasitoids, so you can't buy them. You have to conserve what is out there. There is predation of leafhoppers, various predators that are probably feeding on leafhopper nymphs. Unfortunately, we don't get really high levels of control, and releases of predators don't really seem to make a huge difference in leafhopper populations. So whatever's out there is eating some of them, but most predators are fairly generalist, and so they're just kind of taking advantage of whatever they're finding. So while they're out there, we don't usually do augmentation of predators, with the exception of some lacewings. But again, the number of lacewings that you have to put out to get any kind of reduction is usually not cost effective. Okay, so let's talk about the situation that we find ourselves in. So in the North Coast, historically, Western grape leafhopper was our most common species. So Western grape is a native species, and it has 2 to 3 generations per year. You can see the nymphs there on the left, and then there's the adult. And as we talked about, anagris parasitoids were really important in providing natural or biological control of Western grape leafhopper. So we've done several parasitism surveys over the years, and the blue bars are the non-parasitized eggs, and then the yellow bars are the parasitized eggs. And so what you can see is that even if we're having whether would appear to be rather low levels of parasitism in that early generation, by the time we get to the summer generations, we have fairly large levels of parasitism. And so what we found over the years, my predecessors who worked on leafhoppers found that 10 to 30% parasitism of that first generation of eggs was really enough to suppress the summer generations. And so that means that what we did historically for leafhoppers is that you would watch that first generation of eggs. You would look for parasitism, you would see, and then hope and assume that you were going to get enough parasitism that was going to cover the second and third generation. So we didn't really treat that first generation because that was the generation where we were monitoring for parasitism. So hopefully maybe some of you were doing some parasitoid monitoring with leafhopper eggs. Maybe not, it's hard to see, but anyway, that was sort of the theory behind the historical practices that we've used for Western grape leafhopper management. Now, however, we unfortunately have 2 invasive species. So the first invasive species that I'm going to talk about is variegated leafhopper. How many people think they have variegated leafhopper? Only one? No say? Oh. Okay, well, big surprise today, you probably do. I haven't done a lot of scouting, obviously, in Napa County, but in Napa, variegated is much more common than it ever was. So, historically, variegated leafhopper was the species that we had in the Central Valley and the interior regions. As our north coast has gotten warmer, variegated has moved up into the north coast. And so in Napa, from Yountville through St. Helena, we're dominated pretty much by variegated leafhopper now. So we have all 3 species, but variegated is very common.
And those are typical colors for the nymphs?
Yep, and so these are, and talk about, but there was a handout on when you came in that has an identification guide for leafhoppers, and these are the common colors. So when you saw the pictures of the Western grape, they're pretty white. So when you look at them, when you see them on the leaf, they're white. And they have some very sort of distinct yellow dots as they get older. But the variegated nymphs are that dark color. As young nymphs, they're this dark color, and they have, I call it racing stripes. So they basically have these darker stripes that run down the side of their body. And as they get older, they get into that dark brown color, and they still have sort of darker coloration down the side of the body. And then the adult looks very different from the other adult species. So it's also that sort of brown and orange color. So they're quite distinctive. When you have a mixed population on the leaves, you can pick out the variegated ones because they're the dark ones. Similarly, you can pick out the Virginia creeper ones because they're the ones that have 4 red dots on them. And so our other invasive species, so variegated moved into Northern California basically from the Central Valley, right? Virginia creeper moved into California from the north. So it's known to be in Washington and British Columbia. And then, I don't know, maybe 15 years-ish or so ago, we started noticing it in Mendocino County, right? And that's when Lucia and Glenn were working on Virginia creeper in Mendocino County. And so, again, the nymphs are quite distinctive. So when they're the first instar nymphs, they are that pale white color, but they have red eyes. After that, they get these 4 dots on their back. And so they're very distinctive. You can pick them out on the leaf because they have the 4 red dots. And then they have a zigzag pattern as adults down the side of the body. And again, that's detailed in the handout.
What about the egg masses for the variegated?
So you don't see the egg masses like you do with Virginia creeper. So variegated eggs are laid singly, more like Western grape is, or in smaller groups, and they're laid like in the leaf tissue, and so you can't really see them very well. Yeah. Okay. And so unfortunately, with the variegated leafhopper, we get very low parasitism rates. And that's a problem, right? Because we were relying on the parasitoids as basically our control for leafhoppers. And what you see is that, yeah, you get some parasitism, but it doesn't reach the rates that are sufficient to control the populations by biocontrol alone. And the reason why is what I was just talking about, is that the variegated eggs are actually laid sort of deep in the leaf tissue. And so the parasitoids don't really access them. Either their ovipositors aren't long enough, or they're just like lazy. So like, oh, why should I try when there's all these other leafhopper eggs that are much easier to access here at the leaf surface. So we don't see enough parasitism of variegated to provide meaningful control. And similarly, we find almost no parasitism of Virginia creeper leafhopper in the North Coast region. So just did a survey again last year, but in all the surveys that we've done to date, we find, almost none. So there's, the reason why I put the red circles in is that they're tiny little yellow bars, but you can't see them. So if you can't see them, that's definitely not enough to provide control. And the reason for that is that the anagras just haven't really adapted to Virginia creeper as a host. So unfortunately, when they're antenating, when they're looking for an egg to lay their egg in, they don't recognize those Virginia creeper eggs, which is too bad because there's a lot of them and they're easy to access. And so hopefully over time, anagras will adapt. It has in other regions, but so far it's not adapted sufficiently to provide control. So what we're dealing with here are these 2 invasive species, limited biocontrol of both of those, and so what happens is that's what happens, we get these large populations late in the season, which leads to defoliation. Okay, so as I mentioned, we do have a quick reference guide. I printed some copies. We also have it on our website, just going through how to identify the nymphs and then the adults. And that's really important because if you're out there looking at your leaves, you're looking for nymphs, you're going to want to know which species you have because that's going to help you determine what your management strategy is going to be. Okay, so a little bit about the leafhopper life cycle because it's also a really important aspect. So first learning thing today is that we have 3 species and poor biocontrol of the 2 invasive species, right? Second thing is leafhopper life cycle. So the adults are the overwintering stage. So right now we have adults, they're hanging out in the leaf litter basically, moving around a little bit. What are they doing? Waiting for bud break, just like the rest of us. And so as soon as we get bud break, they're like, great, our host is out, it's growing. Those adults move up into the canopy and start feeding on the leaves. And then as the vines are growing, you get summer generations and then the adults overwinter again. So there's a couple important things to know about those early season adults. So Western grape and variegated leafhopper have what we call a reproductive diapause. So during the winter, they're not able to lay eggs, and they don't become able to lay eggs in the spring until they've been feeding on grapevine tissue. So they have to come up from the leaf litter. Well, first the vines have to grow enough to have leaves that are suitable for feeding, right? Then those adults move up, feed on grapevine tissue, become reproductively active, and then start laying eggs. Virginia creeper doesn't have a reproductive diapause through the winter. So, as soon as there's suitable leaf tissue for egg laying, bam, they're laying eggs. So that means they're laying eggs 10 days, 14 days before western grape or variegated. So if you're laying your eggs 10 to 14 days earlier, that means your eggs are hatching 10 to 14 days earlier. So in addition to, you know, the lack of biocontrol, when we have this Virginia creeper leafhopper, everything starts earlier. So where we might have been 2 weeks later when we were monitoring for leafhoppers, when we were determining whether we're going to treat or not, we're now dialed 2 weeks earlier. In addition to the fact that we have to make treatments for that first generation. Yeah.
What are their preferred hosts?
Virginia creeper?
Yeah.
Virginia creeper vines.
Okay.
And then I've seen them on other ornamentals. So I was just saying, we had a large population in a vineyard, and there was a house nearby, and the homeowners were complaining because they were on their Japanese maple, which leafed out earlier than the grapes, and they were on their roses too. So I think Virginia creeper, what they're doing is they're doing some feeding through the winter on these different hosts. Yeah, ornamentals. Yeah. I don't know how important they are, you know, for the vineyard and the life cycle, you know, whereas like if you got rid of the ornamentals, would you not have Virginia creeper? I don't think so. It's not that kind of like blueberry sharpshooter thing, but they do seem to take advantage of other hosts, whereas western grape and variegated really don't. They just are kind of in the leaf litter through the winter.
I bet is that grape leaf is preferred host for eggs.
Yeah.
So there is that association.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Although Virginia creeper, probably if there were a lot of Virginia creeper vine here, that's where they would be.
Okay.
Yeah. But since we're not producing Virginia creeper vines for any reason, they're taking advantage of the grapes. It's a good question, thanks. Okay. Any other questions about the life cycle? Does that make sense? Why we have to become aware and monitor earlier now that we have these invasive species? Yeah.
What about in areas where the Virginia creeper or the invasive come down with biological controls? Have they been able to generate enough generations to take care of the increasing population? No, so they're not even in other areas, like you said. They can.
Yeah, no, variegated is not under good biocontrol anywhere in California. Virginia creeper is under better biocontrol, as I understand it, in British Columbia now. And then also in Yolo County, it seems like Anagras has adapted to Virginia creeper there, but not in the North Coast. Go figure. Yeah.
What about timing of emergence from eggs? Because what I've seen in Mendocino County is Virginia creeper has a really long period of time.
Yeah, well, we'll see the data, yeah. Yeah, probably because they're laying eggs over a longer period too. Okay. All right, and so the other thing that's happened is there's these interactions with climate. So when we have warm winters, which, you know, is what we're having, that's one of the presents that climate change is bringing us, those are favorable overwintering conditions. And so what we've seen is during drought years, when we have those warm winters, we get like explosively large populations of adults in our traps in the spring. So these are weekly trap counts that are nearing 2,000 leafhoppers in a week. So this is, you know, early season bloom time-ish. Bloom and set, and so that's a big problem too, is that we're getting these really favorable overwintering conditions. Okay, so that's the sort of biology and the important aspects for consideration in all vineyards, but particularly in organic vineyards. And the photos here, you can see Those are very dark leafhoppers, so those are variegated leafhoppers in those photos. So you can see, even without your hand lens, you can distinguish between the variegated leafhoppers and then Western grape and Virginia creeper adults. Okay. So as we talked about, because we have biological control of Western grape leafhopper, that is our primary tool for Western grape leafhopper in organic vineyards. There was not a huge reliance in our organic vineyards on insecticides, and if we were making insecticide applications, we were waiting to see how biocontrol went in the first generation and then deciding whether we needed to make applications during the second or third generation in the summertime. And so what that meant is that insecticides were not going on early season, they tended to go on later season, which is really not going to work for invasive leafhopper species. A, because you don't have enough biocontrol, and then B, by the time you get around to treating, you have adults, you have mixed generation populations, and it's really just, you know, you're spraying something, but it's really just making you feel good at that point, right? Because the efficacy is just, it's just not that great during that late season period. And so what we wanted to do was to really dial in what the timing should be and then start looking at some different product options that we could use for these invasive leafhopper species. So as I mentioned before, this all started with Lucia, who was doing work with Glenn and also with Houston up in Mendocino County with Virginia creeper leafhopper. And so she did some replicated trials in the early days with Virginia creeper, particularly when looking at organic products. And of the products that she was testing, the crop oils and the pyrethrins were the most effective. And she found the same thing that I found, which is that application timing is critical, right? So you've got to get out early because you've got to hit that nymph stage before you start having large populations of adults. And so what we did is I took that information that Lucia had done in the replicated trials and I started doing demonstration trials. So we weren't replicating, we were just, I had populations that were huge in these vineyards, people calling me saying, I don't know what to do about leafhoppers, I'm not having success, so what are we gonna do? So we expanded some of the replicated trials into just field scale applications. I was monitoring all leafhopper species. Of course, we didn't have untreated controls because it was just demonstration. And then I was looking at the timing, so I wanted to know the timing of emergence of that nymph generation of the first generation in the spring, and trying to get the message out, which is what I'm doing today, that those early season sprays are really important when you have those invasive leafhopper species. So that we can reduce defoliation and damage. And so the photos that you're seeing, those are two blocks that are managed by the same viticulturist. In the one block on the right, that was one of our study blocks, and so I was out there monitoring. We were saying, okay, this is when hatch is happening, and we're doing our treatments. In the other block, no, I wasn't monitoring that block. Nobody was really watching that. And that block got treatments at the wrong time, a little bit too late. And so that's the damage that was happening in the untreated block. So even though I didn't have, side-by-side controls, you can see that if you miss the timing, or you think that, oh, I don't really have leafhoppers in this block, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. That's the difference between the canopies at the same time of year and those blocks. So I hope that's convincing that the demonstration trials were effective. And then the secondary purpose that I was doing, and it had to do with the people that I was working with in these trials, is that we were trying to reduce our reliance on pyrethroids and really focus on crop oils. And really that's because pyrethroids are quite toxic. So organic products, surprise, it's actually very toxic to both predators and parasitoids. And we don't just rely on biological control for leafhoppers, but biological control is a really important aspect of our vine mealybug programs. And some of Kent's trials looking at pyrethrin and other organic products for vine mealybug, the pyrethroid treatments have higher mealybugs than the untreated controls. The reason is, in the untreated controls, the anagyrus is providing control of vine mealybug. In the pyrethroid trials, the pyrethrin is neither killing mealybugs and not reducing their populations, but it's doing a great job reducing the parasitoid population. So we were kind of sensitive to that, and I had people who had, been using pyrethroids consistently, and they were sort of worried about some of these other pests that were coming up because of that. And then what you see on the right is some data that David Havlin put together and presented. And what they see in the Central Valley in almonds is that there's really a nice correlation between the number of pyrethroid applications they make and then the number of miticides that they need. And the reason for that is the same, and that any of the parasitoids or predators that we have for those mites are the predatory mites and the six-spotted thrips are getting killed by the pyrethroids, so then they have to come back in with the mites. So that's why you won't hear me talk about the use of pyrethrin, although I realize that some people are still using that for leafhoppers. Okay. And so, again, just to reiterate that because we have very little biocontrol, we are not waiting until that summer generation to make our treatments of these invasive species. We're making those interventions early season. So that means we're out monitoring. So unfortunately, you can use yellow panel traps to monitor adults, but not nymphs. So if you want to look for nymphs, you got to go out, pull leaves, and then look for little nymphs crawling around on those leaves. Do you see them?
Mm-hmm.
That's Monica's videography, so that's why it's a little bit shaky. And those, Dave knows what those are. Those are the egg masses of Virginia creeper. So this leaf in particular has a lot of nymphs on it. And so what we do is that starting in late April, early May, in the blocks that I'm interested in, I start inspecting leaves, looking for nymphs. So ideally, you're going to get out there before they're hatching, because as soon as you see those first nymphs hatching, that triggers your first spray. That's when you have these invasive species, that's what we're doing. So I look at 30 leaves per block. I feel like that gives me a nice understanding of what's going on. You may think 30 leaves is far too many. I can't look at that many. But, you make your own adjustments as long as you make sure that you are catching those nymphs and you know when hatch is happening. And I will say that it's cultivar dependent, right? So if you have a cultivar that had an earlier bud break, you're going to have nymphs earlier than the cultivar that had a later bud break. And so we've seen that too, where even within the same ranch, some blocks have hatched much earlier, and they actually need to be treated earlier, because if you wait to treat at the timing of the later blocks, then the populations are already too big in the early blocks.
So in olden days, we had a pattern that we developed to enable hosts that first generation to not only look for predation, but just to take our leafhopper counts to determine if we're at an economic threshold based on the second generation.
Mm-hmm.
What are you noticing with the invasives, like as far as where to pull the leaves when we talk about 30 per block? Are you focusing only on lower? Are you doing a scatter plot?
Yeah, no, I focus.
Question, please?
Oh, yeah, so the question is, where are we focusing the sampling for those leaves early season? And where I'm focusing, because I'm looking in blocks that I know have leafhoppers, right? So the adults have been in feeding. So I'm actually focusing on the basal leaves and on leaves that have stippling damage. Because that's where, so early season, I'm not looking at upper leaves at all. I'm only looking at leaves in the food zone. You don't have to pull them. You can look at them in the field, or you can pull them.
So it's pretty much presence versus absence. You
For
don't
this,
count it,
in
right?
this case, yeah, so I'm not really when I have those invasive species, I'm not counting and I'm not looking for parasitism because I'm not expecting to find any parasitism. And if you're in an organic vineyard, you need to start your treatments as soon as hatch is happening. And so, yeah, I'm just looking to see, are they hatching yet? And if they are, okay, then I need to get out there so we can start making our treatments.
I'm sorry, hatching means seeing nymphs.
Seeing nymphs, yeah, eggs are hatching, yeah, hatching. That, you won't see that, well, actually I do have a photo of that from the vineyard, but yeah, you're basically gonna see, nymphs crawling. Yeah, so you're looking for nymphs. Any other questions about? Yeah,
Just to clarify, so if you only see, if there's just one leaf that you see nymphs on, is that enough for you to start? Okay.
yeah, it's enough to say like, okay, I mean, I know, if I start, I don't say, yeah, oh, I have one leaf, I need to go tonight, but yeah, that triggers it. Because usually, even if you're only seeing one, they've started hatching. So, you're only seeing one leaf, but if you were to sample 500 leaves, you'd probably see more.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the trigger for the start.
Well, okay, and then you're assuming that you're gonna do multiple sprays.
You are gonna need to do multiple applications. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that. Is that your question? There was another.
That was my
No,
question.
that was your
it
question.
like, is your mildew program, if you're using oil, is that gonna sort of be enough?
It depends on your timing.
Yeah.
So what we found is that with the mildew, that's actually happening, sometimes we're done using oil by the time, for our mildew program, by the time the nymphs are hatching. So I'll get into the timing in just right here. So, and that was the issue, is that we thought those earlier oil sprays for mildew were also gonna be for leafhoppers. We don't start seeing hatch until right around bloom. So obviously calendar-wise, that's gonna shift a little bit every year, but if, for Virginia creeper in Napa, bloom is kind of our timing. I can't say, 'cause I haven't done any monitoring in Sonoma County, you're gonna have to monitor yourself and get a feel for that, but that bloom timing seems to be it. They come out, that generation is feeding, right? They lay their eggs. By the time those eggs are hatching, it's right around bloom. And so that's when usually that bloom just pre or just post spray is the first leafhopper spray for variegated. And then what you see, it's variegated for Virginia creeper. So because it's dominated by Virginia creeper early in the season, and then it's about 10 to 14 days later by the time you're getting more nymphs of variegated and Western grape. And so that was 2021, and this is 2022 timing, and you're looking at 3 different blocks. And so there you can see that in Rutherford in the St. Helena block, by May 10th, we were getting measurable populations of nymphs, but in the other St. Helena block, we weren't seeing measurable populations of Virginia creeper nymphs until later in May. That was still bloom, just because of the phenology of the grapevine. So
Those are all the same varietals?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. So, but yeah, it is varietal specific. It is, growing date specific, right? So if it's an early block, you're going to have earlier hatch then. Okay. And then for Western grape and variegated, you can see that it's shifted just a little bit later. And so we've been monitoring the nymph hatch for 3 years, and what I can say is that it is pretty consistent for Virginia creeper, that it seems to be happening around bloom, and then about 10 days later is when we're starting to see more variegated and Western grape nymphs hatching. And as I've said, it's cultivar specific in in timing. And so even within a single ranch, you'll need to monitor different blocks, particularly if they're phenologically different. And so what did we do? So this is the 2021 and the spray program. So this is a block where they were using oils for mildew. And so you can see that there was an oil spray for mildew, but it was too early because it happened on April 30th, and we didn't see hatch of the nymphs until May 11th. And so that May 11th, in this case, we were on it, so yeah, Jerry, we were out there the day after we started seeing them. But you can also see that we saw almost 15 nymphs, on the leaves that we were monitoring. So that day after, we were out and we were doing our oil sprays. And so we did that first oil spray then, and what happens is that oil spray goes on, you kill off those nymphs that have hatched, but you still have eggs out there, right? So there's eggs that are still hatching. And so the reason why you don't see a reduction in the nymphs after that first spray is because those nymphs were killed, but new ones just started hatching. And so that hatch happens, and that goes back to your question, Dave. So that hatch of that first generation is happening from, mid-May, and we're still getting some hatch in that kind of July period. So it basically goes from mid-May till the end of June, particularly when you have all three species. So it's a long hatch. And so then, 10, 14 days later, we're out again with our second spray and our third spray. In this case, they were really excited because we were killing nymphs, and so they're like, well, there's still a few out there, so I'll make one more spray. Whether you need that fourth spray or not, I don't know that made that much of a difference. But definitely when we had those large populations, it was taking 3 oil sprays. And you'll notice that the rate that we were using too. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but 2% is the minimum. And what happened? So these are the adult counts in those blocks. So you can see that early season, so the overwintering adults, we had thousands of adults. And then basically, in this block in particular, we had a lot of adults early season. After that, we never had large peaks of adults again because we killed most of them as nymphs. And that's really what you want to do.
Did you switch to every row in those 3 sprays, or did you stay with every other row? I'm assuming with the increased water, you were doing every row?
Every row.
For all 3 of them?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you see a rebound in the biologicals after the 3 sprays? The predators?
I wasn't really monitoring predators, so I was sort of doing this on the side. So it's a miracle that we got all the leafhoppers and everything counted, so yeah, I wasn't really monitoring. Sorry. Next time.
So this was not a mealybug block then? So you didn't see any sort of responses in the mealybug population?
I was not, we weren't monitoring for mealybugs, but I will say that if you're farming organically, the mealybug insecticides, the crop oils and the soaps are the most effective products for mealybugs as well. So as long as the mealybugs are on the leaves, right? So if you had mealybugs on the leaves, you could also reduce mealybugs this way. The problem is that it's probably the timing is not quite right because we don't usually have mealybugs on the leaves in May necessarily, right? So, yeah. But yeah, this was a leafhopper only trial. We weren't doing anything with going mealybug. Similarly, so very large overwintering variegated adult population, and then essentially, I won't say nothing. There were some out there, but not really enough to cause any damage. Not enough to fly in your nose or your ear while you're out in the vineyard, collecting samples for red blotch. We have a couple blocks that we work in for red blotch. Leafhopper populations are so bad, we hate being out there. So Western grape is the only species that we did detect some adults, and its phenology is just a little bit later. So we were really targeting Virginia creeper and variegated. We weren't that worried about the Western grape. So yes, we killed some Western grape nymphs, but we did have some adults left out there. But again, not in really large numbers and not in anything that was particularly of concern for the
So what do you attribute the rebound?
well, so this species, their hatch was later, and so instead of getting 3 sprays with them, they maybe only got, 1 or 1.5, and so we just didn't get as good a control of the nymphs. And again, because I wasn't really targeting Western grape, I wasn't worried about Western grape that much, we were really focused on the timing for variegated and Virginia grape. And again, even the Western grape, that wasn't numbers that we were worried about. And so basically what we learned is that when we're dealing with these invasive species, we're out monitoring in the spring. As soon as those eggs are hatching, we want to be out making our applications. Again, you have to consider your crop-specific variable, block-specific variables of what the cultivar is and what the bud break timing was. And we did use 3 applications, and again, that's because we had all 3 species, and so we just had such a long hatch period. And so we were able to kill some, but then more eggs were hatching, and then we had to kill those nymphs, and then more eggs were hatching, and we had to kill those nymphs. And we were using 2% oil in 75 or 125 gallons per acre. And why the rate of 2% oil? So this is kind of interesting. So a lot of people, I think it's been kind of commonly thought that the mode of action of oil is suffocation, but it's actually a nerve toxin. And so that oil, because it's lipophilic, it can go across the insect's cuticle, and it accumulates in the lipid-rich tissues of the central nervous system of those insects. And it basically interferes with the transmission of nervous impulses. And so you're getting loss of mobility, contractions, dehydration, and, right? Well, make sure you got that. And so at lower rates, the oil goes into the fat bodies and it can be detoxified by the insects. There's not enough oil making it into their central nervous system. So you need that rate of, the literature says 2 to 3%. Whenever I tell growers, grape growers, 3% oil, everybody freaks out at me. So it's fine. You saw those photos. We didn't have any phytotoxicity with the oil. The winemakers didn't have any problems with the oil on the fruit. We were, of course, careful. I mean, obviously we weren't out there spraying oil when it was 105 degrees, but shouldn't be out there spraying anything when it's 105 degrees. So we were conscientious of that, but we didn't have any phytotoxicity. And if the rate goes, so like I said, if the rate is lower than that, the insects can detoxify it in their fat bodies. It accumulates there instead of going into the central nervous system. And also, as insects grow, their fat bodies grow with them, right? Just like us. And so the more fat they have stored in those fat bodies, the greater percent of oil that they can detoxify. So that's why the oil sprays, and particularly the 2% oil, is most effective for those small nymphs. And so that's why you need to start those applications as soon as those nymphs are hatching. You could probably kill larger nymphs if you went up to higher rates of oil, but since nobody wants to do that, then we're stuck with this. We're going to kill small nymphs with the 2% oil. Does that make sense? Okay. And so I just talked about the oils today. That's not to say that there aren't other products that can be used for leafhoppers. In Lucia's trials, like I said, the pyrethroids and the oils were the most effective. There are other newer products, so microbial products and borax products. I haven't tested those. Will I get the time to do that? Maybe, maybe not. Will you get the time to do that? Potentially. But when you're thinking about these invasive species, think about the timing and kind of, what rate or what coverage you might need in order to kill those nymphs. So even if you're using a different product, you're still going to want those things that you learned today about timing are what's going to be really important. So, does anybody know what species that is? Yay! So that's what we're looking for when you're out monitoring your leaves, and that's the species you want to go after. So anyway,
Have you noticed any native species in particular that they're also attracted to around vineyards?
Native plant
Yes.
species that the leafhoppers
Yes.
are attracted to? Not particularly.
Okay.
So the parasitoids use some of the native species. So the parasitoids have to keep finding hosts through the winter. And so any species that host the leafhopper eggs through the winter, so the parasitoids will go out into the natural area and then come back into the vineyard. But the leafhoppers, as far as we know, at least Barrington and Western Grape, kind of stay in the leaf litter, is sort of the general consensus on where they're over. Yeah.
So, slightly off topic, I had a question the other day about using oils to control mites. And the question was, why doesn't the oil seem to kill the predatory mites? I mean, it seems like you can use oils to control mites and it does not affect the predatory mites as much. Is that related somehow? Is it known?
Yeah, I don't know that off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, okay.
It could be with the rates, yeah, I don't know. I have to look into that. Yep.
Do you have any recommendations for plants that you can plant to host the anagras or like encourage populations to come into your vineyards or?
Yeah, you can. So, like I said, there are different, I can't off the top of my head, but there are different species that host leafhoppers over the winter, and so then that's where the anagras are hosted. So Houston did a lot of that work. The interesting thing they found is that it more has to do with the amount of vegetation that's around. So it's less in, can you do that in a windrow or something, and more, can you do that, like, do you have a large natural area next to you? So, you're definitely planting, flowering cover crops in the vineyard while you see bees on them, or it doesn't lead to greater, leafhopper parasites, unfortunately. So it has to do with the sort of landscape effects, and if you have a vineyard that's then, within a square you have 20% vineyard and 80% natural vegetation versus, a square mile that has 90% vineyard and 10% native vegetation. So it's really,
You mentioned that in Yolo County, the anagras has adapted. How long did that take? Can we hope for that? Perhaps it's still adapted?
I think we can hope for that because I think it's also adapted in BC. I don't know that we know when really the first Virginia creeper came into Yolo. Houston was doing some work for a while when they were collecting anagras and then, hatching them out and, releasing. It didn't help. It helped temporarily, but not over the long term.
They've got to do their own self.
They got to figure it out at some point. So hopefully they will. In the meantime, if we can kill off a bunch of nymphs and then wait for them to adapt, that would be great.
Good talk.
Other questions or comments?
Nope.
Yeah.
We have Virginia creeper isolated at like the top block of a vineyard, but it's not at the bottom yet, I don't think. Is there any tips you'd give to just prevent it from moving to the rest of the vineyard? It's like an isolated area.
Kill it. Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, that's what you're gonna wanna do, is make sure those populations don't build up, because it can move on its own, right? So through the winter, the adults are gonna move around a lot, even during in the season, they can move a lot on their own. As far as like, oh, should you not, move tractors from one to the other, like, okay, yeah, some probably move, but I can tell you that it does a just fine job getting around on its own naturally, and so the best thing we can do is kind of suppress those populations in places so that it doesn't get to large populations, because the larger a population gets within a block, the more it's gonna seek resources elsewhere because there's not enough food in that block.
I think it's coming from our neighboring vineyard, so would you recommend me, try to talk with them and see what they're doing kind of thing? Because I don't know if they really know that they have that.
Yeah, I think conversations among neighbors are always a good thing, and particularly when you go to them and you say, hey, I just realized that, we have this invasive leafhopper. I don't know if you know about it, can I, show you what the populations look like in our vineyard, and yeah. So suppressing them in an area is better, because, yeah, they definitely do move from block to block, right? So while you can suppress them in your block, if they also are suppressing them in their block, that would be even better.
I have seen Virginia creeper on the suckers before they actually, on the trunk suckers, before they actually go up. So on those sites, when you guys were monitoring, were you just staying with the canopy?
Yeah, I wasn't really looking at, there were some old vines in some of the sites that weren't even that many trunk suckers, but yeah, I wasn't looking at them. But just to watch them. But I felt like we got a good enough, assessment of the population by looking at them. It's always, we have a unique site where,
Yeah,
it is.
for sure.
I mean, hopefully, their suckering pass would happen before the eggs start hatching. So you have to look at that, like when the eggs hatch, because if you drop them if you can drop those trunk suckers on the ground before the eggs hatch, that's even better.
That's very helpful, Monica, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, I was just gonna say, don't get up just yet, because I just wanted to have, some examples of other control strategies as well. And what Monica's talking about is like the main back point of the bell curve. I'm at either end of that spectrum with my control strategies. So I'm from Mendocino County. My biggest thing is Virginia creeper and western grape. And in Ukiah Valley, I can have hundreds of those suckers on one leaf. And so my program is, when I get the 4th instar, I go in with Pyganic EC 5.0, and if I've got Virginia creeper, I usually have to do 2 sprays, because there's more emergence after that. And then again, I wait till 4th, 5th instar to spray that again. Depending upon the year, I can end up doing 2 to 4 of those sprays. 2 early season in that May window that Monica was talking about, and then again late July, early August, when I'm going in with the Pyganic. I have another client in Alexander Valley. They're biodynamic. They don't want to use sulfur. They do not want to use Pyganic, and so we do a 1% oil every 2 weeks, and that's their fungicide program as well, which I don't like. They get a little bit of mildew every year. It's a quad system. It's heavy canopy. It's on the valley floor. This will be our 4th season doing that. The first season, I would say there was economic damage and crop ripening, was a major concern. The last 2 years, there's been very low populations after we began treatment, and we harvested Cabernet 26, 27 breaks easy.
Was there oil residual on the fruit?
Yeah, well, yeah, there always is, because it wasn't a 3 or 4 spray program, it was a season-long program.
And
Yeah.
the winemakers were okay with it?
It's a winemaker client.
Right.
Yeah, and they sell to a lot of other clients as well, and it was fun. Yeah, okay.
how long have you been doing the organics?
Decades.
Decades.
Yes.
Okay.
But I do not have mealybug at that site. So
I would be more concerned about mites. I know, back in the 7 and the Methaway days, I mean, it was what Monica was talking about with the almonds. It's secondary mite research.
I've found that to be very vineyard and year specific on that site. I did not spray mites last year. I did the year before. I did not the year before that.
So you do spray mites?
Yeah, absolutely. They pop up every once in a while, but not every time kind of thing. Yeah. And that vineyard is also very vigorous. It doesn't get stressed. I manage that very carefully.
Well, if you're spraying organic and then also spraying for the mites, is there a consideration to trying the oil so that you don't have to spray, possibly don't have to spray the mites?
I floated that to the client. They refused. So it wasn't mine. choice.
Yeah, I think the other thing to note is that, how long has it been on the Pioneer program? And one of those flocks that was treated with the oil 3 times, the first, seed growing season in our trial, then the next growing season, their populations of leafhoppers were so low, I think they maybe weighed 1 oil spray for the leafhopper. So not only are we controlling them, like, in that growing season, but we're also reducing populations so that we're not gonna, those blocks are not gonna be treated 3 times with oil for the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah. Oil is kind of a wonder drug.
Yeah, and I've been involved in a lot of trials and tried some of these products like azadirachtin, which was like, oh my God, that doesn't do anything. But then I talked to Patrick Griggs, and Patrick, that's his program, and it works. So I don't know if you just quickly describe that program.
Yeah, we all the vineyards at Farm are organic, biodynamic, regenerative. We got a little of everything, and we got the invasion in 1920. Took a little bit, a year to figure out. Oh, there's the dots. There's Virginia. And yeah, we developed an AZA-Direct program, so azadirachtin, we use that. We put up yellow sticky cards and watch for the adult emergence or invasion. It is really obvious. Like, it's not like you're looking for 3 or 4. The trap is yellow, and all of a sudden there's 40 to 50 leafhoppers on it. Like, last week they weren't there, and this week they are. It's really obvious. So with the Virginia, and from what Monica is, 10 to 12 days, they lay eggs immediately, right? So 10 to 14 days later, the AZA-Direct is in my spray, in whichever spray is the closest to that. And then what we've done is it's depended on population, risk, etc. Whether it was, we added the AZA-Direct to sprays 3, 5, and 7. Done that. We've had sites where I've had all 3, where we've had to do, throw it into fungicide with 3, 4, 6, and 7. It just depends. It's worked well for us. I've had colleagues who've done it and they've said, Patrick, we sprayed it and we don't see any change. Well, yeah, because it's not a contact killing thing, right? So the material kills when the insect molts. So you're not gonna see it just laying dead, okay? I mean, most of the time, right? Like what we've seen is you don't get this population that goes from here to you don't see that logarithmic plus curve. It just kind of levels off. And then it's basically leafhoppers, and they're not like you would with Western or with grape. It's not a huge deal. So the first couple years we did a lot of AZA-Direct, and yes, just like Pyganic, it's expensive. But as we've gone along since 2020, 2019, I had a ranch, one of the ones that was not so great, and we were down to 2. And probably, if I wasn't worried about the client and, if it was my vineyard, we probably could have got away with 1, but, and let's see, what else? We also noticed that weed control, I had one client where they were really, they wanted this very really great weed control. But other client was kind of like, oh, we don't wait to mow. We don't, there's some weeds on the vines, fine, whatever. There was a huge difference in success of the program. And they weren't very far away, and they both had, as Monica knows, pretty high leafhopper numbers. One of those, the Virginia, because that's the one in that case that is now barely there. The other one, they're still fighting. It's not terrible, but that also made a big difference.
So the only difference was weed control.
That, and then, that was, yeah, I mean, that's the only thing I could come up with. I mean, we literally, it's on the same spray schedules, the same material, the same, like, the guys would go from one ranch, do that, and then the next night, they're at the one which is right down the road. And that's my only explanation that I could think of.
And better weed control was better?
And the
And that ranch with the weeds also has more variability.
in terms of when things started.
And when things started, and so there are some blocks in that are earlier, and so the timing of the
could have also.
spray is not as exact in that ranch as it is in the other.
And we didn't do, I don't know if we didn't do and I wouldn't advise it to do, I only have it in block A, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna spray B, C, and D, spray the whole ranch. It's not worth it to do that, because you're just gonna end up chasing it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna spray it in A, and then, oh, wait a minute, 3 weeks later, oh, wait, it's in B, oh, let me add it in, it's not worth it.
So, and then just, I invited someone else here that didn't show, but my program is EC 5.0, high rate, just nuclear approach. His approach is using the EC 1.4, and he puts it in at, I think, like 5 ounces an acre, so it's at a lower rate, but he does multiple sprays. It's like in every other spray once he starts seeing things. So again, it's just another different strategy to going in. And I don't know if that rate would maybe be better for beneficials or not. You know, I have no idea.
I forget, mixing with oil, O2.
Yeah, he has some oils in there, yeah.
He's putting with style O2,
He
right?
started doing oils only.
Yeah.
And then you start mixing.
The organic and
organic
oil, right?
and
Yeah,
oil.
so-
Yeah, that's why it goes so organic.
Yeah, yeah. So, that's it. So, yeah, just want to make sure that you all had different ideas out there.
We've
You've got
had
different
a
plans.
client have good luck with the timing leafing too.
Yes, absolutely.
Getting those leaves off.
Yeah, like third instar or something like that, if you can get those, it helps with spray penetration, and they just die when
I think it's hard when you have all 3 species, because the patch is so long. And then they're probably taking advantage more of the canopy, you know, but yeah, you can definitely get some.
So, but yeah, for sure, after seeing your slides, I do not have any variegated. Yeah.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
Not yet.
At least it's easy to identify, it's like
Yeah.
super easy.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you
you.
very much, Monica.